Okay. Hi, everyone. Okay, so there's at least 10 people in here, so I think it's okay to start now. Hi. Hi, Martha. Hi, Coy. Um, okay, so I guess I'll just start by introducing myself, even though most of you probably know me already. So I'm Ava. I did this live reading because I wanted to share some of the past writings that I've done that are about horror articles, horror movies. I've also written articles about short horror films as well. So these are excerpts from these are excerpts from these are excerpts from that my first book, which is called Curse of the Thorn. So you can get this on Amazon, or you can get it at the Dorchester Art Project online store, or you can go into their physical location to get this. So I'm going to read some excerpts from this book tonight, and then I'm going to read some stuff that is new that will go into the new book that I'm trying to finish this year. Um, this is my other book, just so people know. I'm not going to read anything from this tonight. This is my poetry book that I just released. So if you're into poetry, that's all that I wrote in here. So that could be something really interesting for you to pick up. It's also on Amazon and the Dorchester Art Project online store and in their physical store in Dorchester. If anybody wants any more of that information, you can message me at any time and I can give it to you. Um, okay, so the first thing I want to do is a couple shout outs. First, I want to thank my friend Joe. He did my ad that some of you might have seen posted on all my social media. He does all my ads, so I wanted to shout him out in case you guys are looking for something like that. He's very good, and it is paid gigs only because we know what a tough time it is. If you like my hair or have ever liked my hair, my friend Nandi does my hair. Hold on, I'm going to mess this up because she gave me a specific language to use and I don't want to mess it up for her. So my friend Nandi does my hair. If you like my hair, you can follow my friend on Instagram. It's at Queens. Queens is spelled QWEENS _ crowns. Crowns is spelled as usual. So you can follow her on Instagram there, or you can go to queenscrowns.maven with two N's.com, where you can purchase all your hair extension needs. She's great. She's the only person I let touch my head, and she specifically did my hair for this reading, so I wanted to give her a shout out. I wanted to thank my partner, Rob, just for helping me set up and organize all my equipment and for doing a lot of my edits. I wanted to thank my parents just for being my parents and giving me space and opportunity to do things like this. And I wanted to thank the City of Boston, the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. They gave me a grant that helped me purchase equipment and copies of my book that allowed me to do this today. So I wanted to thank them. The next thing I want to do is a disclaimer. So I know how people feel about horror. I'm not going to show any videos. I'm not going to show any images, and I'm going to keep, like, even what I'm talking about as benign as I possibly can, given the subject matter. So I know a lot of people don't really love horror, so you don't have to be afraid that I'm going to do something drastic in this situation. So I'll just start, and we can go from there. I'm going to do a short introduction, and then I'll just move forward. Okay, so the short intro goes: horror is an experience of total absolution. The genre has been misunderstood and callously depicted as listless when it is in fact a cipher. Horror, unlike other genres, demands intellectual immersion and personal inventory. It demands you entangle with the subterranean of humanity, including but not limited to sexual discrimination, sex discrimination, racism, ethnic cleansing, poverty, war, economic assassination, social justice, medical barbarism, corruption, sexual violence, ageism, environmental assassinations, power dynamics, ego, and dishonesty. So I wanted to give that introduction because that is the lens that I view horror films through. I take them very seriously. Like, for me personally, it's more personal to me than my poetry, which is about my life and my feelings. So I wanted to just give that introduction so you understood where I'm coming from when I'm writing these articles and these reviews, just to help you get an idea of that. I want to do like a short history just so we're all on the same page. It is not long at all. I just want to give like a basic, like, once over of, horror and why we're here and what's going on. So horror derives from an old French word. goes aurore. It's supposed to mean to shudder or to bristle. And I've always thought that was fascinating because for me, internationally, French horror films are probably my favorite aside from Canada. I think they make the best horror films, the smartest horror films. So it's no surprise that that's the origin of where these films come from. Um, so the first like real horror film that took off was called The Devil's Castle or The Haunted Castle. This was a huge deal because it was the first horror film that had sound. So this was huge because prior to this, you have Nosferatu, you have Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which they're great films if they are silent films. So, you know, today it would be hard, I think, for a lot of people to appreciate them, but they're great movies. And so they relied a lot on visuals, makeup, acting, facial expressions, hand movements, body movements in general. So that's what audiences were used to. And then this movie came out and it had sound, and that pretty much like blew the lid off of everything. And in 1928, everything kind of came together. The Terror came out, and that was huge, and that pretty much like catapulted the genre. So the way the genre like really came to be, the origin is typically for most people they say it's Psycho, which it's really hard to argue with that. I mean, Psycho came out in 1960. It was huge. It was a big deal. It broke tons of barriers. It changed so many things about not just horror films as they are presented or even thrillers, psychological thrillers, but it just changed the way that movies were made. And so it's a huge deal. But I like to go back a little further, not too much further, because Psycho came out in like September of 1960. But in May of 1960, there was a movie that came out that I almost feel like Alfred Hitchcock wouldn't have been able to get Psycho across to people if this movie hadn't come out first and like basically failed and gone through so much. But I think the reason that the movie initially failed was because it was tackling topics that audiences just simply weren't ready for in 1960. But I think that happened and audiences were very upset and it was like hard and it ruined that director's career. And then months later, Psycho comes out, and sure, that it hit hard, but it was taken a lot easier, I think, because of this prior film. So I just want to talk like a little bit about that movie for a second. So that movie's called Peeping Tom, if you want to watch it. Peeping Tom, 1960. Mark, a lonely film developer, feeds his emptiness by taking photographs of unsuspecting people on the street. He is also making a documentary on fear, which involves recording the reactions of victims as he murders them. He repeats this chaos throughout the film and is never swayed by mercy. The depth and effect of the film lies in the creation of Mark, not the killings on screen. The reason this film ruined Michael Powell's career was not because it was perverse and brutal, but because, unlike the myth created by society, the killer in this case was a chameleon, not an overt threat. So what's so great about this movie, for one, is that the lead actor is fantastic. He gives a great performance. The other thing I love so much about this film is that it really does tackle this idea of facing your fears. And it seems very basic. Like, it seems very basic at the beginning because it's like, okay, the basic scenario is that he's a film developer, he's a videographer, so he attaches, like, a spike, basically, to the end of his camera. And so when he's filming, he's also like committing the crime at the same time. So he's able to capture that moment. And the real terror in the film isn't necessarily what's happening to these people. It's that they are being forced to watch, that they are subjected to basically like facing their own mortality in that moment, because you know what's going to happen and you're watching it happen to yourself almost in like meta form. So this movie definitely opened up the doors for horror films. It changed everything because prior to this, the world was very focused on like monsters, the monstrosities that we have, the Frankensteins, the Invisible Man, the Wolf Man, these things that are, you know, incredibly off-putting. I mean, you could even argue that Psycho itself was also an extreme version of a person, whereas this individual, maybe he was lonely, maybe he was downtrodden, but he wasn't so off-putting that you wouldn't be his friend. And so I think that was really important for like the development of horror film. So now I want to read a little bit of a section of something I wrote that is in the first book I showed you, Curse of the Thorn. It's just a section of an article I wrote on American Psycho, which is probably one of my favorite movies of all time, whether it's horror or not. So I just couldn't resist putting my thoughts together about it because I think it's just a great film about male development. I think it's a great film about the 9 to 5. I think it's a great film about fitting in, if you will. All of those things are like laced throughout the film, and I think that there's something about horror like that they can capture the reality and the travesty and the devastation of something better than other genres of film can, because they can be incredibly raw, incredibly real, and they don't have to apologize for it. So this is a section of my article on American Psycho. Okay. Director Mary Herron made a specific point to sterilize Patrick Bateman so the audience can not just consume him, but they must identify with him. You're as stark and emotionally naked as he is. The murder of Paul Allen, which occurs like 20 minutes into the film, emblems a cathartic stain on Patrick. He is really and truly free from all constraint, conformity, and perfection. The mask of sanity has officially slipped. After Paul Allen's death, Patrick goes on a murderous rampage. He kills old friends, old girlfriends, strangers, the homeless, prostitutes, and his enemies. He is unstoppable. It's an unquenchable bloodlust that incites him now. It's obvious when he is trying to shoot a stray cat at the ATM that Patrick has completely lost control. After committing another murder and a shootout with the local police, Patrick finds himself having a breakdown on the floor of his Wall Street office. Frantic, he calls his lawyer. He lays out a full confession totaling his number of kills, anywhere between 20 and 40 people. However, the lawyer doesn't believe his story, and none of the bodies were ever where Patrick left them. The end of the film leaves you to wonder if it was all a figment of Patrick's imagination. In his world, he is always in control, but in reality, he's the guy whose name people forget, the guy who can't get a table or a reservation at the hottest restaurant in New York, and the guy who tries so hard to fit in but always stands out. He simply is not there. So that's just a small section of my article on American Psycho. I would suggest watching that movie if you're someone who is not squeamish, which there are plenty of horror films that don't have blood. One of the greatest examples of a horror film that is virtually bloodless but gets, toted around as, one of the greatest horror films of all time is Halloween. There is virtually no blood in that film, and most people don't know or understand that. Friday the 13th is a very bloody film, but Halloween really isn't. So a part of why I want to write this book, and part of what I feel like my mission sort of is with this, is to let people know the diversity in horror film, let them know that a horror film is cathartic, it's helpful, it helps me deal with so many things. I think it helps a lot of people deal with so many things, and that there are so many misconceptions that every single horror film is a slasher, which it's not. So that's a huge part of why I wanted to do this, and just something I think people can take away. So American Psycho is definitely not for you if you're someone who's squeamish, but I can think of 1,000 movies that you could enjoy that have no blood in them, that would still be enjoyable for you, that would still hit all the major marks. So now I want to read a section of an article I wrote about The Brood. This movie came out in 1979, and it is by my favorite director, probably. That's a tough sell, but maybe my favorite. David Cronenberg. He is notorious for what is called body horror. He makes films about how uncomfortable humans are with their bodies, what gets into your body, what can come out of your body, what can be made in your body. So all his movies are about things like that. So I wanted to write about The Brood, so I have a section here that I wanted to read about that one. Okay. Nola dispatches her brood, lusting to punish the past, her foundation, her legacy. Candace is captured by the brood, stashed in a psychiatric facility to wait out the final crescendo. Somewhere, Frank, who is the primary source of Nola's rage, moves through the plot unscathed. For all of Nola's anger about divorce, suspected cheating, and a child custody war, she opts to never cause Frank any real harm. This allows him freedom in the final reels of the film to enact violence on her. When Frank ascends upon the psychiatric retreat, he is determined to retrieve his kidnapped daughter and stop his wife. Even Dr. Raglan is on his side, once he too sees that he cannot control Nola, that her anger has flight. Director David Cronenberg uses this moment to engrave and personify the womb. It has anger, resentment, and memory. It is a haunted house of carnal archives desperate to avenge itself, and Nola's brood takes all of that on fearlessly. Frank finds Nola in the barn, draped in white. He attempts to manipulate her, but fails in the long run. For a moment, she is taken by this. For the first time in the film, she has a sense that her family can be whole again. She stands and throws open her silk coat to reveal an external womb. There is a pulsating cord running from her stomach to the small sac. Nola takes the sac and tears it open with her teeth. She reveals one of her brood, naked and covered in blood. Nola takes the fetus, and instead of kissing it, she begins to lick it clean. It is a truly bewitched moment, couching motherhood in its primal beginnings. Frank becomes immediately disgusted, and Nola recognizes this. She sees through his act and begins to rant that she would rather kill her daughter than let him take her away and give her to someone else, someone more fit. Here, motherhood emerges as a gaping wound. It is a cavern where one can lose themselves, as Nola did. Okay, so that was just a little bit about The Brood. I would highly suggest that movie, especially if you're a mother, if you've ever had children, and especially if you've ever been a mother who, maybe during your pregnancy or in the early stages of your child's life, there was a lot of chaos in that relationship with the father or the other parent. So that movie is really good for working out those kinds of things. I think it's also good for people who've never had children. I don't have any children, and I find that it helps me work out a lot of issues surrounding thoughts about motherhood, what it means to be a mother, how that will transpire throughout my life. So that's why I wanted to read a little bit about that one. So the next one I'm going to read a little bit about is the movie Starry Eyes. So I did start to write a little review about this in my first book, Curse of the Thorn, but I want to finish it completely in the one I'm working on now. It's probably one of my favorite movies of the past. Well, it came out in 2014, so 10 years. So probably the past 10 years. It's a movie I can watch over and over. It's a movie I constantly find things in. So going to read a little bit of that, and then we'll go from there. Starry Eyes presents Sarah as a wilted flower. When we first see her, she is transfixed by her flaws, gazing into a mirror. As we're eased deeper into her world, it becomes clear she is emotionally arrested. Her friends mock her, her auditions fail, and she's a victim of her own violent, anxious fits. When Sarah gets a call back from a prominent production company, she tries but falls short. After certain embarrassment, she flees to the restroom, where we watch as she comes completely undone. The lead of this anxiety attack is when Sarah rips out a chunk of her own hair. It immediately resolves her, a sort of inverted climax for the film's pent-up emotional foreplay. This bonds the audience to Sarah through trauma and vulnerability. Her stolen moment in a bathroom stall becomes a circus act when one of the executives who heard her episode asks her to repeat it on camera. So Starry Eyes I really like because it's one of those films that seriously spends some time interrogating and pulling apart and investigating what it means to be confident, what it means to show up, what it means to have support, and what it means to give support. I guess if I had to categorize this film, it would be really hard. I would not call it a possession film entirely. I would not call it a slasher at all. I guess I would say it was part psychological thriller, part possession film, part art house horror. So it has a little bit of those elements running through it. It's definitely a slow burn, so if you're someone who needs constant action on screen, that's not the movie for you. But it is a great movie, and if you ever feel like you kind of just want to let something slowly come to pass, that's definitely the one to do it with. So the next movie I want to talk about is Black Christmas. This came out in 1974. There was a remake recently, and I believe the other version, oh man, I'm bugging right now, but I want to say 2007 is when the remake of Black Christmas came out, and then another version came out. It must have been 2019, because it was super recent. But the one that came out in 1974 is definitely my favorite. It's one of those movies where if I meet someone and they really do like want to get into horror, I always pick this one to kind of like start with because I just think it's a great movie. It gave us a lot of the tropes and themes that we have now in horror films. They started in this movie, so I definitely want to read a little bit about this. And this will be in my new book. So I haven't written about this anywhere prior to now. So this is just the beginning of my thoughts around that one. Okay. Black Christmas begins in a pregnant pause. Jess, the lead character, is wading through the choices surrounding an unwanted pregnancy and weighing her decisions, much to her boyfriend's discontent. Simultaneously, her and the rest of her sorority house are being harassed by phone, an anonymous villain. The use of the phone in this movie is not the first, but it is the most effective. Scream, 1996, obviously borrowed a lot from this film in terms of the use of the phone as an introduction to the killer. The girls initially sense danger when they keep getting obscene phone calls that sound like a choir of people acting out a scene. The voices on the other end saying some of the most disgusting, threatening, and frightening words, and while some of the girls give him a piece of their mind, or them a piece of their mind, other girls are very agitated and concerned. The phone becomes a character, the girls interact with it, and it is a huge focal point of the first 20 minutes of the film. It is not the first time that the film would use the camera as a killer POV. I'm sorry. This is the first time that they would use a camera for killer POV, only letting you see through the killer's gaze. But it's the most effective of all of them. So just for 1 second. So most horror films are filmed in such a way cinematically that you become a character. So you become part of the story, one of the victims or one of the people who's just kind of laced throughout the film because all you can see is this one point of view, right? So you're seeing everything that way. So essentially, you're there, you're in the film. The killer POV essentially takes that point of view and turns it into you being the killer. So you never see the killer in this film. You only ever hear the killer in this film. And again, this is the one from 1974 because they change a lot of things with the remakes. So the one from 1974, you never see the killer. You simply hear the laughing and the screaming. You hear the phone calls. You see things happening. And eventually you figure out that you are that point of view. And the way this movie is filmed is so brilliant because it really messes with your idea of like who you belong to, who you're supposed to line up with, and where you belong in like the scheme of this movie. Because, you know, we go into horror films obviously identifying with lead characters, final girls, victims of this benevolent like energy that, you know, we're all supposed to be against. But movies like this really turn that kind of thing on their head. And I think that's important because, like I was saying before, I think horror demands you take personal inventory. And techniques like that are a way that that's forced upon you. You know, horror films really ask you, what would you do in that situation? How would you handle it? And people like to dig into themselves to figure that out. And so I think that's a way that horror is really powerful that other genres just are not. They cannot make people do that much personal introspection. It's just not that simple, and it does not come that easy. I haven't developed a lot of personal introspection from like watching Bridget Jones, but I love Bridget Jones's Diary, but I don't think that I've molded a lot of myself based off of that film. I'm sure some people would feel differently, but for me, it's like horror actually makes me ask the tough questions of myself, the hard questions of myself, and it makes me look at how I really feel. And sometimes dark parts of yourself can float up, and I think personally that's why a lot of people like really struggle to enjoy horror films and watch horror films, because I think it's a little bit too much of a mirror sometimes. You know, characters in horror films are abysmal. Like, most of the time, you're kind of, like, happy about it, right? A lot of characters that die in horror films, you're, like, glad because they were annoying, or they were rude, or they were sexist, or they were racist, or they were disrespectful, or they were horrible, or maybe they were, like, a bully at school. Like, so it kind of begs the question, like, if that's how, you know, instead of going out and dealing with it that way, you can go to a movie, you can go to a horror movie, and you can deal with that same thing, but you don't have to bring that into your own life. So it's definitely like a release. I think Wes Craven said that. something along the lines of horror films don't contain fear, they release it. So that horror films are actually not supposed to make you terrified. They're supposed to cleanse you of your fear. That is the point, is that you go to this film, you confront this scary thing, and it's not real anymore. And you don't have to deal with the fear because you just like faced it. And you can face it over and over again. It's like a sort of kind of therapy if you really think about it. So yes. So I just kind of wanted to talk about the killer POV for a second because I just think that's one of the most brilliant techniques that these films get to use. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about Candyman. So I didn't write anything fully on this yet because it just didn't come to me fully yet. I usually sit down and this like comes out of me, like I just write, and when it doesn't come to me, I don't try to force it. So I'm definitely going to write about Candyman in my new book, but I guess I'll just talk about it a little bit for the sake of it being probably one of my favorite movies, again, period, across the genres. So Candyman came out in 1992. It is probably up there with Jaws and maybe Friday the 13th in terms of taking something innocuous and completely destroying it for people. So both the bathroom and the mirror become terrifying things in this film. But the main terrifying thing in this film is not any of the murders that happen. It's not even any of the crazy situations. It's the overt poverty that is happening around this graduate study that these two women are doing. So if you've never seen the film, it's two women. They're doing a graduate study in a paper on urban legends, and it's set in Chicago. And the idea is that Candyman is this urban legend in Chicago, and they're trying to, just talk to people and get information on it. And while they're doing this, they sort of, break the boundary of respect for, things that have come before you, and they go to the places that this energy has been known to be, and things get released, and then the rest of the film is about dealing with what's covered up and what's acceptable. Because that's the thing about Candyman, is it's really, really a deep dive into the things we cover up and that we think are acceptable, that we allow to be acceptable because we're covering them up. And it really delves into that idea about, like, just because your hand isn't exactly in it does not mean you are not guilty. So, for example, the lead character, Helen, she's just thinks she's writing this paper, and I think in her mind she felt she was doing a good thing. She was going into this neighborhood and she was going to give it some press and some life, and kind of like give these people some, like, time and respect, and put their stories on paper and have their words heard. But excuse me, I think what she forgot is she was sort of just traipsing in blind, and she didn't have any respect for the boundaries of that situation. And I think that's a lot of what Candyman is about. It's about you knowing where the boundaries are and ignoring them fully, for your own benefit, and how that can be globally painful, how that can be nationally painful, and how that can be painful in your own city, in your own household, and how these things can sort of just reflect and move in and out that way. So that was a little bit about Candyman. So just give me 1 second to get something else. So the next one I want to talk about is The Descent. The Descent. So I saw The Descent when it came out in theaters, and shout out to my stepdad because he took me to every horror film I wanted to see when I was a kid. So I saw everything because of him, and he took me to see The Descent, and I loved it. And so I wanted to share a little bit of what I wrote about that. Now, this is another one that's in the first book. So Curse of the Thorn has this little section called teaser reviews, and I wrote a little teaser in there about The Descent. So I'm just going to read the little section on that and say a little bit about that movie. The descent is definitive emotional plunder. From the moment you're thrust into Sarah's trauma, it echoes like a tilt-a-whirl. The feeling of apprehension evolves throughout the film until it finally breaks. Sarah's transformation from meek, protected victim to bloodthirsty hunter is euphoric. As an audience member, you're so desperate to escape the surroundings, and she leads you out. She is Carrie Underground. So I love The Descent. I don't know how many people have seen that movie, but I think if you're someone who so it's a bloody film, but it's not a slasher film. And I think that's a really important distinction, because slasher films can at times be gratuitous. Now, those are my favorites, so I love them no matter what, but they can at times be gratuitous and the violence can seem unnecessary. I don't think The Descent is that kind of movie. So for those of you who haven't seen it, quick synopsis, it's about a group of friends who go cave diving. I guess they're friends who they do these adventures together all the time, and they go as a group to do this event because one of them had a tragedy in her life the year before. So they kind of get together to do this thing as friends. They're going to go cave dive because that's what they do, like do adventure stuff together. And what happens in those caves is very nuanced because there's more than a couple monsters down there. And there's more than a few things that get just wrapped up together, tangled, and need to be untangled. So there are interpersonal issues happening between the girls that are only brought to light once they're in this cave. And then you have the actual cave monsters that are down there. They are blind. They've never been, above ground, so they're blind. So they work purely off of sound. So this film is pre-A Quiet Place. This film is pre-Bird Box. And it definitely played with that idea of how does a human being, disappear auditorily? It's very easy as a human being to disappear visually, actually. That's something that I think a lot of human beings understand. But how do you truly disappear? And do you want to be disappeared? So these are some of the questions that come up with The Descent. The lead character goes through an enormous tragedy, and the things that come up when she's down there, they're difficult and they're tragic, but it's definitely a great movie for working out any type of interpersonal issues that you might be having. It's a great movie if you just want to, kind of deal with any type of grief. It's essentially, it's a grief film. It's about how you deal with that, what goes on, what works, what doesn't, and how that's completely nuanced for everybody. So I would always suggest The Descent to anyone. The second one is for diehards. I like it, but I know that it's not exactly, a favorite film, and I don't take offense to that. I understand. So the next film I want to say a little bit about, and again, I'm getting into the teaser trailers, the teaser reviews that I wrote. They can be anywhere from 1 to 5 sentences. I try to keep those really short. So one I would like to talk about really quick is one called Inside. Now, this movie came out in 2007, so this kind of echoes back to what I was talking about before of my love for French horror films, because Inside is a French horror film, and there are no monsters in this film. There are no, monstrosities, creatures, made up things made in the lab, things conjured up. Nothing like that is happening in this film. But it's probably one of the most uncomfortable films you will ever watch. I mean, you don't even have to know French to be uncomfortable watching this movie. I mean, there are subtitles, but, a lot of times, voices can really affect how a film hits you. And with this one, I feel like you don't even need to know the language to kind of, shut your eyes, maybe, or, and still get those same feelings that it's supposed to be giving you. So the quick one I wrote about Inside was, when Sarah is trapped in her own bathroom, drenched in blood, barefoot, and pregnant, you'll be thinking, how can this get worse? And then it will. That was literally what I thought watching that film. I'm watching it, I'm like, how can this possibly get worse for her? And the minute I thought that, it got very bad for her. So this movie is, again, a grief film, which most horror films really do deal with grief. I mean, ghost stories are essentially always about grief. So this is a grief film. Again, it's about a woman who has a tragedy, and she's pregnant and alone. And it's Christmas, and she's alone at home, probably like 9 months pregnant, and someone comes to her door in the middle of the night, and the movie sort of like goes from there. So I would suggest that if you're somebody who can handle subtitles. I know that can be difficult for a lot of people. It is difficult for me at times, but I push past it for certain films. So I would definitely suggest Inside 2007. It is a French horror film. So the next film that I actually would like to talk about, I watched recently. I don't know, this is maybe like 2 weeks ago. But this is probably, I don't know, at least the 20th time I've seen the movie. But I happened to watch it recently a couple weeks ago. So, the movie is called Frozen. It came out in 2010. This movie definitely is one of the films that teeters. And I know I have these discussions with people all the time about, like, what is a horror film? Like, is this a horror film? Is that a horror film? And if, like, Friday the 13th is a horror film, then how is, The Babadook a horror film? So, horror is very expansive. It is an umbrella term that has things going underneath it. So, Frozen is a horror film. It's just psychological horror. That's still a horror film. So, Frozen came out in 2010. It is by director Adam Green. He's been doing a lot of really cool stuff. He is the same one who is behind the series Hatchet, which is one of my favorite things that has come out in the 2000s in general. It's a great series. It's got 4 films, and strangely enough, the 4th one is one of the best. It's an equivalent to a Friday the 13th or a Halloween type of series, but it's like been called the new American slasher. So Adam Green did that, and then he also did Frozen, which is about these kids who get stuck on a ski lift in, like, over the weekend, pretty much. Over the weekend, and not through a storm, but, ski lift. So, what I like so much about this film is that it is very authentically fear-based. The basic human fear of heights. The basic human fear of death. The basic human fear of abandonment. All these things are really prevalent throughout, like, the whole film, and they are able to keep that tension going the entire time. So I would highly recommend that movie if you're someone who you're not into blood and you just kind of like the psychological aspects, and maybe you can handle like a little bit of violence, because again, it is a horror movie. Some people are going to, not make it, but it is not a violent film in my opinion at all. So I would highly suggest that one if it's something that you're into. The next movie I wanted to talk a little bit about is one that I love very much because it was the first horror film that meant a lot to me. It was the first horror film that I thought it was more than just a movie. So the movie Suspiria came out in 1977. So the original is my absolute favorite. They did do a remake not too long ago, which I actually enjoyed, but I will always love the original the best. So this is by Italian film director Dario Argento. He's definitely up there for me. And what I love so much about this movie is that it attacks the American attitude about travel. So I love horror movies that delve into this topic because I think, and especially with what's going on now and travel being even more of a restrictive thing, I think it's important to recognize those things. So another movie that really gets into that subject of like American attitudes about travel is actually I Know What You Did Last Summer 2, which I believe is 1998. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. Yep, 1998. So that movie gets into that same subject matter, this arrogance that comes with traveling, the arrogance that comes with American citizenship a lot of times, especially when we are no longer in America. So I would highly suggest that film. So it's about a young woman. She's a ballet student. She goes to study in the most prestigious school in Germany. And when she gets there, they're not right, and it turns out that it's like basically a coven for witches. Okay, so it's a great movie. So especially if you like witches, this is a great movie for you to watch. But I think what makes this movie so special are a lot of the visuals in this film. So this is one of the last films in Technicolor, which if you haven't seen a film that one of the last films in Technicolor, what that really looks like, I would highly suggest that. I would also suggest Blood and Black Lace if you're into that kind of visual effect. That's a great movie for the same thing. But Suspiria definitely captures womanhood, what it's like to go out and have your own life and grow up and start making decisions, but also what that means for your sexuality, your like humanity in general. How does this factor into your dreams and your choices going forward? And I think it also really captures the idea about how complicated it is to ascend. So, you know, she's going to this like perfect school and it should be easy, but there's so many obstacles. And I think it just really gets into that idea, you know, we all suffer from that, I think. It's like, if I do this, it will equal this, and that there's some kind of path. And Suspiria is definitely one of those films that really tackles the idea that there is no path, that you're sort of out there on your own, and that you do the best you can with things, but that there is no way to accurately make anything better. And so I think that's really depressing for people, right? But I think the film does a great job of wrapping it up in such a way that you understand the necessity of that despair, and that, you know, those nuances are necessary in life and present, and you can't just ignore them. And the film really like begs you to kind of like come into that feeling in your own right and just not write things off, and to kind of go through instead of over or around. That is basically the theme of Suspiria, I would say. So that's definitely one of my favorites. I'm just going to do a time check. Okay, so I'm going to talk about one more film, and then I will leave the last 15 if anybody has questions, or if anybody needs a recommendation, or if anybody, I don't know, just wants to like talk about something. So I'll leave those last 15 minutes so anybody can, you know, say what they want to say, or ask me anything, and then we're done. So I appreciate everyone sitting here with me for, you know, this time in your life. I know everything going on right now is very stressful and hard for everyone, so I appreciate any time that you would take out of your life to sit here and listen to me go on and on about something that you may not even care about, but that means a great deal to me. So just want to say thank you to everyone for coming. So let me talk about this last film. So I'd like to talk about Scream 3, because for me, Scream 3 is my favorite in the series. I will stand on that, always say that. I love the original, but I feel like that's sort of understood. I don't feel like I need to really say that. However, I think the third film really tackles some like intense subject matters that make it the best in the series. It ties up the most things. It's the most nuanced. It's the most complicated. It's the most honest. It's the most like what I was reading before, like how I see these things through a lens of social justice. Scream 3 is like the epitome of a film that takes those things and works it out through like a horror script. So what I love so much about Scream 3 is a couple things. One, it deals with the issue of wrongful conviction. And it deals with the issue of wrongful conviction in the perfect way, because it doesn't just isolate it to this issue of poor Cotton Weary, he was wrongfully convicted, and now he's just downtrodden. It really gets into the idea of how you can take something and make it a positive, or at least move your life forward on a tragedy. And I think that's important to know, because Scream 3 came out, and I believe it was like, what? Scream 3 came out in 2000. So that's a really specific moment in history, especially with talk shows, with reality TV, and with social media. This is like a buzz moment, and Scream 3 really like delved into that. It took over the idea that, you know, Cotton could take all of that pain and suffering and like turn it into other people's pain and suffering, because essentially he became one of these talk show hosts that exploits people exploits their experiences, exploits their traumas and their trials. And so it's interesting that he was going through so much and he suffered so much. And if you've seen the films, you remember in the second movie when he tracked her down at college and approached her, he was like very upset. He was, still in that place of, resentment and anger with her for what had happened. But if you also remember, by the end of that film, he got to be the hero. So the issue never really was that he was wrongfully convicted. The issue was the level of popularity that the lead character, Neve Campbell or Sydney, possessed. And that movie sets up the idea that that's what's been going on all along. The issue in that film series is this young woman's power. It is Sydney's power. It's the way other people love her. It's the way other people respond to her. And so much of what happens to her in that movie is purely because people are jealous of her, presence and the way she presents herself. And to punish her for that, they do all types of things, which is obviously going after her for coming up on movie number 5. So Scream 3 also gets into the past of her mother. Now, up until the third movie, we have just known that Sydney's mother was promiscuous and that she was killed in what essentially was a rape and murder, that she was killed that way, and that's all we really know up until the third movie. And the third movie really gets into some things. It starts to delve into the issues of PTSD, and it really exposes the fact that her mom had a whole past that she just closed the door on, locked up in a box, and never talked about. But that never stopped her from feeling a certain way. It never stopped her from acting a certain way. So Scream 3 is a great movie because it really, it makes people have to address in themselves, how do you treat survivors? What is your expectation of survivors? What is your belief about how they should, function, how they should talk to you, how they should deal with this issue, how they should not deal with this issue? Those things are all happening in Scream 3. So for me, a lot of my understanding about what that trauma looks like comes from that series. And, if I was a teacher, I would absolutely say that, if we're going to learn about PTSD and sexual violence and rape trauma syndrome, then we're going to watch the Scream series and see how much of a ripple effect that one incident had in her life and how it rippled to her daughter and her husband and her town. And, yes, she made mistakes, but how all those things were tied into that. So, Scream 3 is my favorite. Everyone will always tell you it's the worst. Tell them I said it's not, because I know better. I think that it's an amazing series, but the third one definitely is the smartest. It's the most intellectual, and it's the most emotionally accountable to you and to the characters. So that's an idea of what the book is going to sound like, what kind of ideas it will have, what it will look like, how it'll be set up. So that was that. And before I do, because I'm almost there, I wanted to do 15 minutes to let people ask me questions or ask for recommendations. But I also wanted to share, 2020 was such a difficult year for everybody. So one of the things I really delved into was movies. And so I wanted to share what my top movies of 2020 were. This is in no particular order of best to worst. It's just my favorite films from 2020. Not all of them are horror films, but they're all grappling with difficult subject matters. So there's no happy films on this list, if that's what you were expecting from me today. Okay. So the best films of 2020 for me were Evil Eye. This is on Amazon Prime, and it's free. It was great. I would highly suggest it. It's another film that really gets into the nuances of the rape trauma syndrome, of what it means to have flashbacks, what are triggers, what is triggering. This movie really delves into those things. It is an all Indian cast, which I think is fantastic and amazing, and it was just a beautiful film. It was well written, it was well shot, so I would definitely suggest that. I also enjoyed The Lie. This is also on Amazon Prime. They were part of a 4-film release moment, and I think that The Lie and Evil Eye were the best 2 of those. I loved 12-Hour Shift. This is not necessarily a horror movie. It's about black market organ trading and drug addiction and county hospitals. It's a dark comedy, a little bit of violence, but it's mostly dark comedy and I think most people would probably enjoy that. At least most people I know would probably like that one. I loved Shallow. I watched this on Xfinity cable, so I forget what channel it was on, but Shallow was a great movie that came out in 2020. It is about, pica, is about a pregnant woman who has pica. So just take that as you will. You can look up what pica is if you don't know. And it was a great movie. It's another slow burn though, so if you're not somebody who wants to like really pay attention to the small details, probably not the film for you, but it's a great movie. Sea Fever, that was an awesome movie. It came out the beginning of the year. I loved it. It's a lot to watch during a pandemic, but it does help you sort of like work those things out. Because it's got some very similar properties to what we're experiencing right now going through a pandemic. It is about a virus on a sea vessel. So I would absolutely suggest that. I loved One Bedroom. If you're into Scientology or studying Scientology, I mean, and the details around it, and you'd like to see like a psychological horror film that sort of plays with those ideas, One Bedroom is definitely it. I loved Becky. That was fantastic. Highly, highly recommended to anybody. Anyone. Centigrade was awesome. That is based on a true story. It was, I believe I watched that on Hulu. So if you have Hulu, you can watch Centigrade. Yep, based on a true story about an author and her husband who got stuck in a snowstorm when she was promoting her book. They get stuck in a snowstorm and they literally get buried in their car. So their car is like underneath snow. It's basically like trapped. And she is pregnant. Go. So that was a great movie. Blood on Her Name. Really fantastic movie. Not a horror film. Very slow burn, but great movie. I believe you can watch that possibly on Tubi. And if you don't know what Tubi is, I would highly suggest that you get it right now. It's got tons of free movies, tons of free shows. Highly recommended. And the last movie that I really loved in 2020 was Inheritance. I thought that was really great. It's a movie about this young woman, and her father passes away, and he leaves her this secret down in the basement, and she goes to see what it is, and the film sort of goes from there. But it was a great movie. Another great movie about the past, about legacy, about histories and families, secrets in families, how there's no such thing as a secret in a family, even when you think you haven't told anyone, because ripple effects, like I was talking about with Scream 3. So all of those things make it a really fantastic movie, and all of these movies came out in 2020, so you shouldn't have too hard of a time finding them somewhere. I can't promise that they are all free. In fact, I'm pretty sure they are all not free. But the majority of them can be found on Hulu, Amazon Prime, and maybe Tubi. Yeah, those are the three places. Okay, so that was it pretty much for what I had to read and what I wanted to share tonight. If anyone has a question, they can drop it in the chat. I will hang around a few more minutes. Otherwise, thanks everybody for coming and for listening to me go on and on. I definitely wanted to have more like structured written stuff to share with you, but I'm happy that I got to share what I did, and I hope that you get a chance to read the book. I hope that you get a chance to read my other books if you haven't already. And again, you can get both of those on Amazon, or you can go to dorchesterartproject.com. They have an online store, local library. If you look in there, both of my books are available, so you could buy them from there. They're an awesome nonprofit organization, arts organization. So, if you'd rather give your money to them than Amazon, I totally understand, and I would encourage it. So, yeah, I will see if there's any questions. Otherwise, thanks for coming, everybody. Bye-bye. Okay, how many tattoos do I have? Okay, so anyone who knows me, all of my tattoos are horror related except for one. One that is in remembrance of my dad. So I have 2 on my ankles. I have 1 on each ankle. Blair Witch symbol. I have a 13 on my inner wrist. I have the same tattoo that Michael Myers has in Halloween 6 in the same spot on my other wrist. I have one of the symbols from 13 Ghosts on my inner arm. And I have a huge piece on my leg that has the balloon from it, a machete, a chainsaw, Freddy's glove. I'm missing something. But yes, a huge piece on my leg that does that. So that's it for my tattoos. Okay, last question, and then I'll go. Somebody asked me what's my favorite international horror film. So I can't really pick one. So what I will say is the top 3 places that make my favorite horror films outside of America are, in no particular order of better, Canada, France, Korea. So those are the 3 places that I would suggest. If you're someone who maybe wants to get into international horror, I would absolutely suggest those 3 places to start. So, okay. So that's it. It's 57 minutes, so we can call it here. Thanks to everybody for coming. If you want to talk to me about anything, you guys know where to find me. If you have any questions, if you need me to explain anything, I'll be here. Okay, thanks, guys. Bye.